one of the biggest wastes of time and money happening in the economy right now is that let's pay a strategy firm to come in and make us feel comfortable, because that is the outcome. There is comfort. It's not impact. It's not change. It's not truthfully doing anything about your business. It's having something so that when you talk to your investors, talking to your board, you have talking points that make you seem on top of it. The inverse of that is actually what's working, which is just get your people that are the right people starting to use this stuff and just have them go.
Generative AI is transforming life as we know it, not just in the workplace, but in governance, ethics, and beyond. Here at the AI Lab, we're dissecting all of this to help you make sense of it. I'm Melissa Mahtani, your host for today. I've just joined the AI Lab as their journalist in residence. Today, I'm turning the tables on your regular host, the founder of the AI Lab, Ryan Kurt, to find out more about him. Ryan, it's great to be with you.
It's great to be with you.
You founded the AI Lab as a community for executives to learn from each other about AI strategy with, and I'm quoting from your website here, no hype, no jargon, just practical strategy from leaders who've done it before. So to kick us off, I want to get your elevator pitch on what the AI Lab is and what it isn't.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we started, it was actually a consulting company, and we realized we weren't necessarily that good at consulting compared to the alternatives. So the community is really about what we call open source AI strategy. There's no true experts in the market today, meaning even the people that built the AI models don't fully understand how they work. So we have certain practice areas around, revenue, finance, HR, governance, et cetera. And we bring in the best experts we can possibly find across our network or the rest of the market. And we build little pods of expertise for our members. So they do learn from each other. We also have guided experts that come into the organizations and into the community. But what we have found is we try not to pretend like we have all the answers, because no one does. We really focus on accelerating learning faster than the rest of the market. And it's worked out quite well. The members that we work with tend to climb the AI maturity curve, or however you want to describe it. They tend to rapidly accelerate through those motions relative to everybody else in the market. So that's the elevator pitch.
I mean, it's great, and it's obviously a great and much needed space to be in, but AI is moving so fast. 6 months ago, we weren't talking about agentic AI, and that's all anyone or any company is thinking about. So how do you advise clients to do X today when the tech tomorrow could be completely different?
One of the things we do very different than almost anybody is we don't get too obsessed with frameworks, and we don't get too obsessed with defining exactly the way that companies need to approach this every time. AI is changing monthly, if not faster at this point. But most of what our companies deal with has nothing to do with technology. If you just paused AI development right now, the capabilities are so advanced that it would transform pretty much every company in the market if they just focused on what was available. So this ends up being much more of a people challenge and much more of an organizational redesign and leadership challenge. So my point with that is we can put people on a path, on a program where as the technology changes, it's kind of irrelevant, because the technology is becoming the easiest part of all of this. It's really, how do you identify the people in your company that need to be the change makers leading the way, and how do we kind of wrap resources and enablement around those individuals so they can sort of take their companies forward. I guess, Melissa, it's just the technology. I'm not saying it's irrelevant, but it's really a secondary factor in all of this. It's really the people and the organizational redesign part of it.
That's one of the things that actually struck me the most before I even met you when I was reading about AI and just what the AI Lab does is, so many people hear about AI and they like thinking about job losses. But you've really taken this approach where it's about people and culture, and you see it as expanding the kind of people that you actually have in your company. Talk to me a little bit about that, and also where you stand then on the job loss front.
The majority of people that I've seen really championing or hyping up the doomsday scenarios with job loss and the rapid disruption, I don't think most of those people are in the weeds of what's actually happening in the market inside of companies that we work with. There is going to be disruption. There is going to be job displacement. There's no doubt about that. And when you think about this from the macro level, it is quite scary. Because if you look at any group of white collar knowledge workers, absolutely, there's going to be a lot of movement and displacement in that pod. But for at the individual level, it's never been a more empowering time, equal opportunity. So if you're somebody who's motivated, that wants to sort of change the trajectory of their career, their earning potential, there's never been a better time at the individual level. I think the big gap has been most companies are terrible at providing their people with the resources, the confidence, the clear path of here's what you can use, just go. Long way of saying it, I think it's just an unbelievable opportunity for individual contributors right now. Where I fall on the job loss piece is the big unanswered question is not whether there's going to be a lot of displacement. It's how fast will it happen? If it takes years, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, that should be plenty of time for the market to metabolize that change. And there'll be new opportunities, new roles that are 100% going to pop up. And the effort will then be around reskilling and switching the definition of what a job even means in certain aspects. I'm very skeptical that it's going to happen so fast where you're going to see the broad-based disruptions that will, like the Citrini Report that was very, doomsday type scenario. I don't think the timeline is going to happen that fast for a lot of reasons that I can get into. And we do feel very accountable to workers. So we absolutely work with CEOs and their team, but we're very upfront and say, we are also going to work with your people. And whether you bring your people to us or not, we host free events all the time for training workers, enabling workers. We want to be that source of empowerment because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are going to carry this change forward because AI on its own doesn't really do anything. It's a tool.
I do want to talk about the Citrini Report in a moment, but because we do talk a lot about doomsday scenarios in AI, and I do want to talk about some of them. But actually, first, I'd love to hear from you specifically. You've been in this space for a long time, since like 2013, before we were all talking about it. What do you think is the great promise of AI, and what are some of the most concrete, effective changes you've seen in your network?
2013, when I was first in this space, there was a headline in the New York Times, which you probably have seen from the presentations we've gone through together, but there was a headline that said, a human wrote this article, and then in parentheses, I think it said, but maybe not for much longer. And it was 2011, actually, when that article was written. That was Narrative Science. It was the company I was at. It was a CIA-backed language model platform, very, very, very early days. But a number of executives came to us wanting to know, like, is the technology real? What can it do? It was a lot of the same use cases that we're seeing today. That's why people came to us. The technology was difficult to deploy. It was not a very scalable platform, but the promise was there. And so we've been having these conversations around what if, like the magic wand scenario, if this was true, what would your company look like? And so I think the main promise is, if you look at the fallacy of the Citrini Report, which I know we're going to get into, it's that there's a fixed amount of work to be done. I don't think that's true. I think when you have an unlimited capacity to apply intelligence to problems, you just have a lot more problems that you can solve, and you have a lot more problems you can solve differently than you could before. So I think the main areas of the market with the most excitement around is if you point this at healthcare and life sciences, I think every stakeholder that society cares about the most, which is the patients and the welfare of our children and our elderly, there should be amazing outcomes there because we're compressing time. When you launch a new drug or you're trying to bring a new treatment to market, there's so many milestones you have to go through to get that thing to market. Many aspects of that we can now compress, and we can parallel path so many different ideas where instead of testing one particle, let's test 1,000 or 1,000,000 all at once. So I think healthcare is the obvious space that I'm highly confident there's going to be great outcomes. And there's areas of the market where I think you could argue no one really asked for this. No one really asked for, a new mousetrap or a better way to automate certain things. So I am skeptical in very relationship-driven aspects of the market that AI will be overly transformative to the end user experience of those services. But from an executive's perspective, the clients we work with that are, I think, the furthest ahead are viewing this as, how do we just do a lot more? How do we launch a new product? How do we create a service line that solves a problem that was unsolvable before? In the course of doing that, you now have people doing more work in a new area that needs more people. The stuff that maybe you were doing before with a lot of individuals doesn't need to be done the same way or as often. So I think we're already seeing the shift happening, but it's requiring more people, at least for the companies that I think are doing this the best, versus how can we just do the same or do more with less? That's an easy way to juice the earnings of a business and the market value in the short term. But I don't think that's where the big wins are going to come from.
That's a really interesting take. I heard you say in one of your recent interviews that companies are treating AI like a tech innovation, but you actually compared it to an alien species coming down to Earth and us learning to work with them. So, based on that analogy, how should companies be embracing AI if it's not just automation and efficiency gains that you just alluded to?
Yeah, I think the AI or the alien life form was a good analogy. I will just throw another one at you. When the Model T was released, if you were to Google search pictures of Model Ts being pulled by horses, you'll see a bunch of images. And so, to me, when I say this is not a technology initiative, the reason people attached horses to Model Ts is because they couldn't quite figure out how to get their hands and their feet working together to drive this new machine forward. But they knew how to attach a horse to it. That was a very familiar thing. I would say 99% of the market, including those that are the furthest ahead on this stuff, we all have horses attached to our cars at this point, because the mindset shift of how to do things differently, we're unwinding decades, hundreds of years of how work has been done. We're unwinding that, and it's really hard to kind of conceptualize the new way. If you were to take a personality test, for example, the culture index is a common one, and you were to give it to every employee, with a high level of confidence, I think we've done some research on this, we could already tell leaders, based on those results, here's the individuals that are most likely to move the fastest, the furthest with AI today, just based on how they approach work and their personality profile. Which means, I'm not saying don't train your whole company on AI, you should. That will raise the basement and the floor quite a bit. Companies need to find the individuals that are wired to just move at light speed with this technology, because not everyone is today, but those people do exist. And when you find those individuals, you have to put them into a part of your business that might even be separate from the rest of your company, and give them the protection, the enablement, the resources, and also the incentive structure to create as much redesigned new way of doing work as possible. That's a very inexpensive way to approach transformation, because if you give, let's just say, 5 people access to the industry-leading AI tools, that might be $100 per month per user. They'll be able to come up with redesigned processes, new service lines, new product offerings. They might be able to create 10 of those in a month, and then you experiment with the ones that you think have the most broad applicability in a much smaller setting. Then you scale, the ones that actually should be scaled across the company. That's completely backwards from how most companies are approaching this, which is, let's hire a strategy firm. Let's look at our whole business. Let's interview everyone. Let's put together a very detailed PowerPoint that tells the executive team, here's all the use cases, here's the ROI, here's what you should do. That might take you 6 weeks, 2 months. By the end of a first meeting with an executive or an outsourced firm, you should be already building capabilities. By the end of that first meeting, you should be identifying who those change makers are and just letting them go immediately. Almost no one is doing it that way, and there's a lot of reasons why, but that's what I would recommend to do tomorrow.
It's a very optimistic take because, again, it comes back to people and culture, and you're encouraging companies to really invest in the people that they have, which is great. But I think a lot of companies, at least that I've spoken to previously, would say that's a big investment. It's a big investment of time and money where you don't have any guaranteed returns, whereas they do feel that when they're bringing in a strategy firm, it feels safer. They feel like they're going to have some sort of guaranteed outcome. But it's interesting because if I'm hearing you right, you're saying, well, no, this technology is moving just as fast as strategy firms know maybe a little bit more than your people if you give them a chance.
I get asked a lot, how do you get somebody to be proficient with AI? And the answer is the same every time for me. It's who's the most proficient at your company in doing the work that you do today already. So who's a 10 out of 10 in your services department? Who's a 10 out of 10 in sales and marketing? The gap between that person being a 10 out of 10 with AI is just the knowledge of how to use it. Because when you have somebody who is already a high performer, is not going to wait for the company to build them a process or give them a better way. They'll just figure it out themselves. Once they get their hands on something that truly turns them into a 10x, if you will, employee, they're going to take it and run with it. What they will come up with, I would bet my life savings, is better than what McKinsey, Bain, BCG, any of these firms, they all just started figuring out generative AI at the exact same time that everybody else did. So this whole transformation with AI is very different than the past. The buyers and sellers, the strategy firms and the CEOs, everyone got access to the exact same level of intelligence, proficiency, capability at the exact same time. So there was no head start for the companies that you usually hire to come in and help fix your company. They didn't have a head start on this stuff. But the people inside your business who have been working there for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, they have so much domain expertise, so much context on how your company works, and they probably have opinions on how it should work differently that there's just no way somebody outside can ever match that. And I think one of the biggest wastes of time and money happening in the economy right now is that let's pay a strategy firm to come in and make us feel comfortable, because that is the outcome. There is comfort. It's not impact. It's not change. It's not truthfully doing anything about your business. It's having something so that when you talk to your investors, talking to your board, you have talking points that make you seem, I'm trying to be kind, on top of it, I guess it is the best way to describe. But the inverse of that is actually what's working, which is just get your people that are the right people starting to use this stuff and just have them go, and then build the scaffolding around how to make those small ideas big, how to make your people. You should be focusing on making your people feel comfortable and empowered, not your executives. The executives should feel as uncomfortable as they've ever felt in their life right now. But I think without the confidence and the comfort of your people knowing that this is good for them, that is holding back millions and millions of workers across the economy, at least in the US, and it's holding back their companies. So I just can't say enough that I think we've all gotten this pretty much wrong from the start. And when I see Block and Jack Dorsey laying off 4,000 people, there is so many reasons why that happened. But what is 100% true is every company now can look and say, if we cut X% of our workforce and we just try and do the same with less, or we do a little bit more with less, we will be rewarded by our investors. And that's how the market economy typically works, is your number one stakeholder is your shareholders, your investors. I think that is unbelievably short-sighted, and it will not work in most companies' favors to approach it that way.
And there's going to be a lot of workers out there who will be rejoicing at what you've just said, and a lot of strategy firms who will be out for you now because they're the ones who are going to be out of work. Based on what you've just said, which I think is fascinating because it is the inverse of so much of what we hear out there, tell me, without necessarily naming any companies, what are some of the worst ways, the top 3 worst ways you see companies using AI?
The one clarification I'll give you is, if I look at what our company sells, and this isn't really about us, we're selling the same thing that the big strategy firms sell, which is, number one, it's trust and it's credibility around the topic. And they have that. The problem is the way that they typically approach the downstream execution from there it's the old way of doing it. I 100% am confident that all these bigger firms will find this new muscle. They will be very, very good at doing what I just described to you. We do not work in the enterprise. We do not work in the Fortune 100 type level. Those companies have a whole different level of risk and bureaucracy and things that those big strategy firms are so good at dealing with. They will figure out this model. It's just I don't think most have today. So what I would say, what companies are doing wrong specifically in many ways is I think they're underestimating the value of compressing time and accelerating learning, but meaning there's a lot of questions they want answered. The value of getting answers to those questions and getting data as fast as possible, you can't underestimate the value of that. I think they're overestimating the benefit of let's figure out exactly what we should do in every part of our business and let's plan for how that architecture is going to look. Let's plan for how the project is going to be rolled out. Let's plan for every contingency, which if you're rolling out a new cloud environment or a new robotic process automation system, you can do that because 6 months from now, the technology is not really going to change. So it makes sense. And there's a lot of frameworks and roadmaps you can apply. But with AI, you have to be so comfortable exploring almost for the sake of exploring without really knowing for sure where you're going or what the end result's going to be. John Windsor, who's one of our advisors from Harvard, he talks a lot about the explorer mindset versus the exploit mindset. I think a lot of companies are trying to just plan for every contingency, every integration point, all the data that isn't perfect, all these reasons why the project might fail. I just, that is such a waste of time. So if you just get going with a thesis or a set of ideas, you can get answers to those questions in days, and that should be the expectation. Then you scale from there because you'll see what's actually working. I can't stress enough how most companies are not doing it this way. And I think it's suffocating them and preventing them from getting answers, getting data, and getting confidence to actually move forward.
I want to pivot slightly and talk a little bit about governance. So we're recording this on March the 3rd, and just a few days ago, we witnessed this huge showdown between Anthropic and the Pentagon about safety guardrails that Anthropic wasn't willing to give up. For listeners who aren't familiar, as a result, the Pentagon signed a deal with OpenAI, and it's basically moved now to blacklist Anthropic from government contracts. So this brings up serious questions about AI governance and ethics, and I'm curious to see where you stand on this.
I do think most observers of this story have, I think, missed a couple of things, or they don't go deep enough on a couple of topics. I'll start with understanding, meaning understanding the technology at its core, I think is an unbelievably important topic. I think trust is another level of this, meaning is there an issue between Anthropic and the government because of trust in government or trust in the current administration? And I'm not making a political assessment on that. I do wonder how much of this is specific to the individual people in charge of certain departments versus the overall concept of government control. And then lastly, I think it is, how do you decide who gets to control how a technology is used? And we have a constitution, we have laws. And so my point is I think you have to kind of break these things into components. AI is unlike any technology that's ever been launched before in that the people who have built it, and I should change that, the people who are growing these models don't fully understand how they work. But we know they're unbelievably powerful. We know they're unbelievably performant in a whole bunch of areas. But if I had to guess, when you look at Dario Amodeo or Sam Altman, and they are on record saying they don't fully understand why their systems do certain things, and now we're handing that technology over to the government to, support our troops and to protect our citizens and help our partners and our allies. There are absolutely use cases today where that technology is going to be super helpful to the humans using it. But when you get into the world of autonomy, and there is not a use case in the world where an AI agent can be fully autonomous without a person being somewhere in a loop, if that use case has any sort of risk associated with it. Waymo has been around for a long time, self-driving cars, and we've all learned recently that there is a team of people in the Philippines on standby when their cars get in trouble. So there's people in the loop with these autonomous machines with Waymo. So I would argue that Anthropic and OpenAI, I'm sure, have a much deeper understanding of what their technology can and can't do, where it has potentially massive risks associated with it. I think they understand those risks better than the government today. And I believe that was a big factor in how all of this has kind of shaken out. If this was a much more mature technology, I don't think any company would say, we're going to absolutely tell the government what they can and can't do in the realm of what's legal and not, meaning like, even though if it's legal, we're still going to say you can't do it. I just don't think that's not going to be a theme that we'll see play out in the future. But as we know it, generative AI was really, not saying invented, it really came on the scene in 2022. But if you look at December of last year, the progress we've seen from today back to December is probably greater than the progress we saw from 2022 up until December.
Yeah.
And so these things are just moving so fast. So I do think that level of who understands this technology the most, there is an asymmetry there where the model companies do understand it more than the government. I mentioned trust, which we don't have to go into a whole lot, but I do think that is a part of it. I'm not in these negotiations at all, but it does feel like on both sides, I think ego and public opinion and the way that these companies and the government, the way that they wanted to be presented to the public, I think that was a huge factor in, more or less trying to win this conflict. Winning the conflict might have been more important than the details of what was redlined or not redlined. I think that was a factor. And then control, I've already touched on. We have elections every 4 years. In the House, we have elections every 2 years. We elect people to make these big decisions on behalf of the populace. And over time, the populace and our representatives will become more educated on AI. And I think those decisions will absolutely need to rest in the hands of the policymakers. But right now, it's just moving so fast that I don't think the way this went down is fully reflective of the black or white nature that we tend to look at things. There's a ton of nuance.
It brings up a greater existential question, which is very much in the understanding, because how can you govern something if you don't properly understand it, even as a policymaker, because it is changing so quickly. And when it comes to potentially, as we just saw with the government, like life and death scenarios, I think, potentially much more concern or caution needs to be given.
Completely agree. And there's a concept of the order of nines, meaning if you look at how accurate does something need to be before you trust it to act autonomously. So it's, 99.99999. Like how many nines need to be there before you trust this machine? So if you're flying an airplane, I don't know, 1 billion nines. Like it's like you're not going to let autopilot take off, fly, land where there's no pilot literally sitting in the plane. I can't imagine a scenario where that's going to happen anytime in our many lifetimes. But when you're talking about, let's have an AI agent run our marketing campaign, if you run that marketing campaign 1,000 times and just one of those times it messes up, not that big of a deal. So I guess where I'm going with it is when you get into higher risk use cases, the best way to govern this is the people that do this work today, they already have very clear policies. There's already very clear legal frameworks for how, different parts of the economy, different parts of the government, they have to follow the law, they have to follow certain rules and governance. If the person is responsible for the final decision on a high risk area, the accountability lies with them. How they get there is absolutely changing with AI. And if you look at the agentic path that we're on with AI, you hear a lot about people are now becoming managers of AI agents. Our CTO, people in our company, he's managing dozens of agents right now to do his job. He's now covering orders of magnitude more ground than he was before, but he's ultimately accountable. He's ultimately responsible for the output of his work. So I think, Melissa, there's no simple answer to governance long term, but right now, I have not seen any area of the market where if it's a fairly risky or even a minimal amount of risk, there has to be a person in the loop managing, overseeing, making the final decisions. Simple answer.
So I want to ask you, looking at the same thing, we've been talking about it a little bit, we've been touching on regulation. If you zoom out of America, you think about this on a global scale. On the one hand, AI is this tech that it should be the great equalizer, because if it's in the hands of everyone, then, everybody should be able to do the same thing. But we're seeing people and companies use this in wildly different ways. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing the US move to have no regulation, whereas other countries are trying to put some guardrails against it. What does that mean for companies that operate globally?
In most organizations, especially larger ones, when you set a technology, when you define your technology strategy or your tech stack, usually you're solving for the lowest common denominator of policy, of risk, of the type of user you're supporting. So with AI, if one part of the market has very strict rules where almost you have to run these things on premise and you can't even really use the cloud because data can't go into the cloud, and then the rest of your company is a little bit more open, I do think you're going to see people more or less solve for how do we just have one policy so it's not confusing, and we're going to solve for that lowest level of risk. The answer to that is you're probably going to just give Microsoft Copilot to everyone, hire some consultants and say, we'll put it into Azure, let's make it as secure as possible, good luck. But if you look at the frontier of what's possible with these tools, the gap between, for example, Claude and Copilot, there's no comparison. And if you predetermine what the tools are, and then you say, let's do as good as we can with those tools, it's very similar to saying, we're only going to hire digital employees that are from this company that have these capabilities, these features, even if there's digital employees that are way better, way more talented, the LeBron James, Kobe Bryant of digital employees, but we're just not going to hire them because they happen to work for a different company. Competitively, that's a huge, just a massive disadvantage. So I think the regulatory landscape, even within the United States, is already creating so much confusion that it's forcing companies to kind of retreat into, well, if we use Copilot inside of Azure, we're safe. But if your competitors are not doing that and they're much more open and willing to kind of use whatever the best of breed capability is, I don't think we've not yet conceptualized how big of a gap that might create in the market. And I think it's going to be sizable, and you'll probably start seeing it by the end of this calendar year.
So where do you stand? Where does Ryan Kurtz stand on how AI is being regulated? Are you for more regulation or less regulation?
There's so many incentives at the market level to not stop. I mean, I think stopping is not, whether I think we should or not, it's not feasible to just pause until we figure all this out. In lieu of that, I think there's a level of prioritization of stakeholders that we have to get right. So I think children is number one. I think we need to educate as best we can. And I'm not saying the government has to educate people. I think there is an impetus of the people to educate themselves. And hopefully, working with you, hopefully we can be a part of just providing balanced knowledge on this. But my answer is not simple. I think we need to figure out who are the top priorities that we have to just nail safety and regulation for first. And then let's make sure the people making decisions are educated as best as possible. The population, the representatives, the policymakers, let's start there. So we're already 2 years too late on having a policy for protecting children. I know in Europe, there's already age restrictions for social media. It's starting to come out with ChatGPT and other tools. I never want to tell somebody how to parent. I have 4 kids, but I can promise you, if the typical parent was much more educated on what these tools do, how they work, what they're not, because they seem like something that they're actually not, and the potential risks of what these tools can do, I think there'd be pitchforks out at school board meetings, and there isn't. And so I think children is number one. So to your question, yes, business regulation is important. I just feel like let's solve the more vulnerable population problems first. And I think there's nothing stopping us from doing something about that today. On the business front, as a proud American citizen, I also want to make sure that we're not at a disadvantage globally. So I think we just have to create paths where we can walk and chew gum at the same time, because protecting children actually has nothing to do with optimizing the interests of our economy. So that's my point, is I just think we have to kind of break this problem down into pieces and start to take bites at it in the right order. And we've lost the ability in America, especially, to think in nuanced gray terms. It seems like it's an all or nothing. Regulation's bad. Everything should be regulated. Both are completely false, in my opinion. I know I'm not giving you a straight answer on some of this stuff, mostly because I think there's some areas where the answer is 100% abundantly clear. Other areas where there's just a lot to be sorted out still.
No, I think that's really interesting, and you're absolutely right. It's being presented as a zero-sum game, either this or that, when actually it's not. We can do both. So just as we start to close this out, I want to talk to you about the Citrini Report, which you mentioned. So again, for listeners who aren't familiar, a couple of weeks ago, there was an essay published by the Citrini Group and Alap Shah painting a real doomsday scenario for the AI economy by 2028, so very, very soon. And it basically outlined tons of white-collar job losses, and what the authors dubbed a ghost GDP is household income would suffer from the job losses despite output going up on paper, and so consumer spending would suffer. And they proposed an AI tax as a solution. So, and the AI tax would be on AI companies. So Ryan, first of all, you said there were a lot of fallacies in this report, and I'd love to hear what you think they are. And then I would love to get your thoughts on whether you think an AI tax is a good one.
I guess starters, shout out to Alap Shah. I would love to talk to you again, because I used to work with him in 2009, 2010, early in both of our careers. So would love to actually talk to him with you present. He presented that report not as a prediction, which I think was, again, nuance is lost. Is the scenario that he painted possible? I think absolutely elements of it, and even the collective nature of it, is possible. I think right now everything is a probabilistic situation where there is so many outcomes that could happen that are very bad, that could happen. There's also a bunch of outcomes that would be unbelievably good for a lot of people. And so I think it was a scenario, which I think a lot of people missed. It was not a prediction. But where I fall on this, and we'll get into a little bit of, some of this is firsthand experience that I'm going to describe, some of it's an opinion. When you lower the cost of a highly valuable in-demand resource, generally speaking, the economy will find more uses for that resource. And intelligence is now highly abundant. Intelligence meaning, the core logical aspect of intelligence. I'm not talking emotional intelligence or relationship intelligence, but the cost of intelligence is going down orders of magnitude. And because of that, we're already seeing that intelligence being used at a much higher rate than it was even 2 years ago, because the intelligence is getting better and it's on average getting cheaper. So I think that's a fallacy in that there's absolutely more work or more demand for work and outputs than there is supply at this point. So I think that's the first thing. Two, I think it presupposes that the concentration of the wealth that these machines create, that it will end up in a small number of people's hands. That's absolutely possible. I do think there's a lot of externalities that have not shaken out yet. In general, the population has not woken up fully to what AI even means. How do you define what AI means? Do we even understand how language models work? So all these things are not yet into our subconscious as a society. So public opinion will have a say in how far, how fast AI will go. Block was the first company to have, you could argue, a heavily influenced layoff from AI. If there's 10 more of those in the next 3 months, what do you think is going to happen to public opinion and even thinking about things like collective action with do new unions form, do new sort of collective alignment of the working class, like does that alignment politically inside of companies, like it's hard to predict how people will react to things. So I guess where I stand is there is going to be mass disruption of the job market. I see so much of the headwind of that being pervasive on a timeline basis, where it's going to take a long time for a lot of companies, especially the bigger ones, to metabolize and work through all of this. The technology is good enough right now to replace a high percentage of what a knowledge worker does today. But the exponential curve that the technology is on is completely decoupled from the social curve of adopting a technology that humans are on. Like we have the horse is attached to our Model T for almost all of us. And it's not as simple as just getting rid of the horse and figuring out how to drive the car. I just think we're going to have a lot of time to figure some of this out. If you go on Indeed right now, the number of software engineers that companies are trying to hire is up considerably. Will that stay the case? I don't know, but I will say that software engineering is the one function that's been the most disrupted the fastest. Their job has changed. Does that mean that the amount of software that needs to be built is fixed? If that was true, then I don't know why you would already be seeing an increased demand for software developers. So I guess like anything, I'm much more on the let's see how long some of this stuff takes. And the longer it takes, the more we have time to see other things pop up. And we have more time to reskill and all of that.
And what about the AI tax? What are your feelings on that?
So I don't like to be overly political, but I will say if you go back to my podcasts 3 years ago, I've been talking about this since the very beginning, and it was like I had 10 listeners, so no one really probably paid attention to it. Whether you can say that the AI model companies stole our data or just used it without fully our knowledge of what they were doing, we say these machines are smart, but really they've just taken the collective knowledge or the collective, anything you've ever said online, your tweets, your Reddit posts, articles, blog posts, videos that you recorded that maybe you weren't even thinking would end up in an AI model someday. These models were trained on us. We are the input to these models. They didn't magically spring up. Like Alaska, for example, is sitting on these massive oil reserves, and they provide a incentive or a reward, more or less. Like if you live in Alaska and you're a citizen, like you get money because there is a natural resource being extracted out of the earth. They get paid. And so to me, it's always seemed a little bit fishy that these machines, which are absolutely going to disrupt the job market, which is the backbone of how we all feed our family and how we all, enjoy the benefits of being in the world that we live in. These machines are just reflections of us. And each one of us has already contributed our knowledge. And most of us, 99%, didn't get compensated for that. And so it kind of goes back to just who owns our data and what compensation should there be for someone selling your data. And, the value of you to Facebook is way higher than the value of Facebook to you. It's just not even an equation. And I think we're seeing the same thing. So should there be an AI tax? If you start to see these companies operating at an 80 to 90% margin, NVIDIA, for example, makes just a gross, and good for them. The market is there. They have such an amazing amount of profit per unit sold. If you start to see an AI model making a mass amount of profit on the collective knowledge of humanity, then I just don't know why 500 VC firms and 1,000 people, like why are they the ones that get to put that money into their pocket? So again, it's not really a socialist point of view. I think it's the most capitalistic thing ever, which is we handed over a good, we handed over an asset. That was a capital exchange. We have not been compensated for that at this point. So I don't know. 100%. We need to think about how we redistribute or how we just distribute the contributors, the creators of these models, because the AI companies, sure, they figured out how to use transformers. They figured out a lot of stuff. Good for them. The core product is not theirs to own. It's not. They don't own it.
It's a really interesting point. It's an interesting idea, and I'd love for our listeners to tell us what their thoughts are on that. Ryan, what keeps you up at night when you think about AI in the future?
I try and lead with a sense of optimism often, but last week, Anthropic had somebody who used Claude to hack the Mexican government. And they used Claude to, create a very creative attack vector to go steal documents, highly, highly sensitive documents. I'm guessing the user of that agent didn't say, here's exactly how I want you to do it. Here's exactly how you should hack. Here's the code. They probably said, here's my intention. I want you to go steal this. And we know because Anthropic Claude said no. Then the person said, please, will you please go steal this? And whatever the magic words were, Claude decided it was going to go against its policy and go steal those documents, and it did it. There's nothing unique about hacking into a system and stealing a document when you think about that was an attack and that was a hacking exercise. How many of the world's weapon systems are fully off the grid, fully protected? I don't want to go into too much detail to really give people panic, but there's now, servers full of, as Dario Amadeo would say, there's servers full of PhDs that are coming. In North Dakota, there's a server farm that's doing more work than Manhattan, like that sort of stuff. Who's to say that somebody won't be able to just say, I want to do something really bad, and I'm gonna have a swarm of agents, hundreds of thousands of agents, go try and do that bad thing. The defense mechanism might work 99.99999% of the time. It only takes one. It only takes one agent to get through the walls, to say the right thing, to do the right hack. So I think what really keeps me up at night is, will the bad guys with these tools be ahead of the good guys? And usually there's a gap because the incentive to be bad in some ways tends to be a bit higher initially than the incentive to stop, right? So that keeps me up at night. I spend a lot of time with universities as well, so pivoting a little bit. I don't know what to tell my kids about what they should be when they grow up. And I think part of that's maybe just a lack of imagination on my part, which is you could probably imagine what, if you want to be a teacher, what a teaching role might look like in the future. So I don't think it's a doomsday scenario at all. It's just the lack of specificity that I can give to that answer does concern me because I don't exactly know. But I'll just lead with that first one. I think that is a very big concern. People are, with this Anthropic thing last week, it's like, oh, we shouldn't let AI model companies control their tools. The government should do what they want. Or you're on the other side, and it's like, we shouldn't let private companies decide whatever. But I don't think we're being specific enough around what are the risks of what these tools could do today. Let's define that risk, and let's actually talk about it openly and start to figure out, do we want to maybe put some guardrails so we don't expose these things to weapon systems? It actually does keep me up at night. That's at times.
Totally. I mean, we talk a lot about AI hallucinating or AI doing bad things, but not enough about the people controlling the AI doing bad things and who reports it. So it is a very good point, and more needs to be done. We could have a whole discussion about safety and safeguards, but my last question for you, hopefully an optimistic one. You started the AI Lab in 2023 with the hope of connecting individuals so they could learn best practices from each other. It's now March of 2026. The AI Lab currently has various sub-labs on governance, finance, healthcare. What's your hope for the AI Lab by the end of this year?
The customer journey that we typically see is we help companies to begin with. We don't charge them for it. We just be as useful as we can. And usually someone says, we want more. Can we please pay you? We work it out. By the end of this year, it's hard for me to see a limit to the number of companies that will want help from something like what we have to offer. So I will never sort of bypass the need to make sure the quality of experience and our ability to help does not waver. And so I think by the end of the year, we'll have orders of magnitude more companies that we will be helping. There's also going to be a lot of companies that we'll have to say no to intentionally because we want to make sure that the group that we're working with, those compounding returns, and we're already seeing 6 months ago, our relationships with members was one way. If you just fast forward time, in almost every case, we have members having just totally breakout experiences and success with tools. And it's not necessarily because of anything we're doing. It's we create the environment for these types of breakaway successes to occur. And so by the end of this year, would I love to have 100 companies that are having a breakaway experience, not only for the companies, but for their employees and the workers? I think that's 100% possible. We'll probably be at 50 companies by the end of April. So maybe I should up my expectations a little bit, but I'm very cautious about making sure that the end user experience, the access to our core people, there's a high standard we hold ourselves to, and we'll never grow just for the sake of growing if it's going to diminish that. So more impact for more people at more scale.
It's been fascinating speaking to you. I mean, we've touched on so many issues, and each one of them could be, a podcast in itself. And I very much look forward to continuing this conversation with you and with others in this space. For our listeners out there, if you have questions about this podcast or in general, send them to us at podcastquestions@theailab.ai. We'd love to hear from you and try and get you some answers. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks for joining the team, Melissa. We're excited to have you here.